on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Beth was mocked by her sister Lauren in front of 200 wedding guests. When Beth chose to marry Luke, a simple but hardworking farmer, her family saw it as a step down from their elite standards. But what they didn't know was that behind the dusty boots and quiet life was a story of love, resilience, and a secret that would turn all their judgments upside down. If you've ever been judged for choosing a different path, for following your heart instead of chasing status, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and follow my journey as I rise above the doubt. Stand firm in who I am, and prove that a life built on love, purpose, and integrity is never a step down. Beth had always known her wedding day wouldn't be perfect, not with her family involved. But as she sat at the head table, hand in hand with her new husband Luke, she hadn't expected the humiliation to be so public, so intentional, and so cruel. The clinking of champagne glasses still echoed in the reception hall when her older sister Lauren stood up, her designer bridesmaid dress shimmering under the soft lights. To the happy couple, she began, voice dripping with faux sweetness, who always did love playing in the mud. A wave of forced laughter swept through the crowd. Beth's stomach clenched. She caught sight of Lauren's smirk and the amused expressions of distant relatives. Her cheeks flushed as 200 guests turned to stare, some chuckling, some whispering, most silently judging. Beth's fingers tightened around Luke's calloused hand beneath the table. Luke, unfazed as ever, gave her a gentle squeeze and leaned in. "Let them laugh," he whispered, voice low and steady. "We know what we have." She loved that about him. Even now, still dusty from the early morning hours spent checking irrigation lines before the ceremony, Luke remained grounded, calm. He wasn't pretending for anyone. That authenticity was one of the reasons she had fallen in love with him. But unfortunately, that same down-to-earth simplicity was what her family never respected. Her youngest sister, Emma, slid into the seat beside her. Always the peacekeeper, Emma offered a tight smile. "I think it's romantic, honestly," she said softly, "but Mom's been popping antacids all week." Beth offered a hollow chuckle. "That explains the case of sparkling water in the bridal suite." She glanced across the hall and saw her mother, Diane, watching her like a hawk, lipstick smile glued to her face, eyes sharp with tension. Beth was used to being the family oddball. Lauren, at 32, was the golden child, Stanford MBA, corner office in Manhattan, married to Ethan, a hedge fund manager who probably wore socks worth more than Beth's wedding gown. Emma, the youngest at 27, was the charming, diplomatic one who managed to stay neutral in most family battles. And Beth, at 30, she was the one who settled, in their words, not hers. Her dress was her grandmother's, altered by hand. The reception was in a renovated barn on Luke's land. The centerpieces were made from fresh wildflowers she and Luke had picked together that morning. And to her family, it was all laughably quaint. The room quieted as her father, Richard, stepped to the microphone. Beth held her breath. If there was one person who could make things worse, it was him. With a polished tone and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, he began, "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter Beth." Beth braced herself. "Beth has always been unique," he said, pausing just long enough for the crowd to chuckle. Beth noticed Lauren sip her champagne, eyes gleaming with barely concealed glee. While her sisters pursued careers in business and public service, he continued, "Beth chose a simpler path, one rooted in the earth." Quite literally. Another wave of polite laughter. Beth felt Luke's hand tighten around hers. "She's marrying Luke," Richard went on, "a man who works with his hands and understands the value of hard work. We wish them happiness in their humble life together." Beth forced a smile as the crowd applauded half-heartedly. Humble life together, hung in the air like a quiet judgment. Was it supposed to be a blessing or a backhanded insult? She looked over at Lauren, who leaned toward Ethan and whispered something that made him grin. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were about her. This wasn't a wedding toast. It was a eulogy for the life her family believed she'd thrown away. She swallowed back the knot in her throat. The shame, the frustration, the years of trying to be seen, only to be reminded, on her wedding day, that she would always be the disappointment. The one who settled. Suddenly, she stood, her chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing every eye in the room. Raising her water glass, because of course she had skipped the champagne to save on the alcohol tab, Beth met Lauren's gaze head on. To family, she said, voice clear and calm, and to learning who really has your back when it matters. For the briefest second, Lauren's confident smile faltered, but then she raised her glass with the others. Recovering smoothly, the toast had landed, even if no one quite understood just how deep the line Beth had drawn truly was. As she sat back down, Luke leaned in and murmured with quiet pride, "That's my girl." Beth didn't know then how prophetic those words would turn out to be. But that moment marked a shift, a declaration not just to her family, but to herself. She might be the one who played in the dirt, but she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life being buried by their judgment. This was her life, her love, and her choice, and she was done apologizing for it. 3 years after the wedding, things had finally settled, or so Beth thought. She and Luke were living a quiet, fulfilling life running a small but thriving farm. Yet her family still hadn't stopped looking down on her. Every family gathering was a reminder that, in their eyes, she'd chosen a life beneath her potential. That summer, the annual family barbecue was held at Lauren and Ethan's new estate. As always, the event was extravagant, stone walkways, a catered buffet, everything curated to perfection. Beth arrived with a homemade green bean casserole, grown and cooked from their own garden. It wasn't flashy, but it was fresh, wholesome, and hers. "Oh, you brought food?" Lauren commented, eyes flicking to the dish like it might carry a disease. "Green bean casserole," Beth said, placing it next to the catered spread. "From our garden." Ethan appeared behind Lauren, martini in hand, his polo shirt crisp and spotless. "Is it organic?" he asked, half smiling, clearly amused. Before Beth could answer, Luke stepped in, placing a reassuring hand on her back. "Homegrown," he said simply. "No chemicals." Right, the whole farming thing," Ethan replied, nodding with exaggerated interest. "Still playing in the dirt?" "We're doing well," Beth said evenly. "The farm's been profitable for 2 years now." Lauren laughed, a light, musical sound with an edge sharp enough to cut steel. "That's adorable. Ethan just closed a deal that probably makes more in a week than your farm does in a decade." Several guests nearby chuckled, not because it was funny, but because they knew which side of the family held power. Beth said nothing. She didn't need to defend herself. Not today. Her mother, Diane, glided over, wine glass in hand. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "if you had just taken that internship with Lauren years ago, you might have had your own office in the city by now." Beth didn't reply. She didn't want an office. She had an orchard, berry vines, greenhouses, and a husband who worked alongside her with genuine love and respect. But none of that mattered to her family. In their world, success was defined by business cards, stock portfolios, luxury properties, and exclusive vacations. Later, everyone moved to the newly built pool house, Ethan's pride and joy. He gave a tour like a real estate agent, detailing the imported tile and European water filtration system. Beth stood at the edge of the group, her casserole untouched on the buffet table, feeling like a stranger in her own bloodline. Luke offered to check on the truck, claiming he might have left the windows down. But Beth knew the truth, he needed air. These gatherings drained him. They chipped away at him in ways no hard day on the field ever could. She stayed behind, partially out of courtesy, partially out of curiosity. She knew they would keep talking. She wasn't naive. Every time she and Luke left one of these events, she carried home a tight knot of unease. It was never about open insults, it was the subtle jabs, the dismissive smiles, the constant need to measure up against a standard she never cared to meet. They never asked how she really felt, never acknowledged the local award she won for sustainable farming innovation, or the fact that she and Luke were now employing 8 people from the community. To them, she was still the daughter who threw her future away, the smart one who had settled. But over time, Beth had come to understand something vital. Their disdain wasn't rooted in hate, it came from not understanding her at all. And when people don't understand something, they often mock it to feel superior. What her family didn't realize was that Beth no longer needed their understanding. That day, when Lauren once again made a backhanded comment about modern farming and simple minds, Beth didn't flinch. She just smiled, not bitterly, not with resentment, but with quiet certainty. Because someday, they would see. Someday, they'd understand who she really was. And when that day came, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. It started with whispers, awkward silences during calls, vague comments about tight markets and restructuring. Beth didn't think much of it at first. Her family had always played their financial cards close to the chest. But then Emma, her youngest sister, called late one night. Voice shaky. "I think Lauren and Ethan are in trouble," she said. "Big trouble." Turns out, the picture-perfect power couple had made some risky investments that went belly up. The Hamptons house? Listed. The boat? Gone. Even her parents had taken a financial hit, unbeknownst to Beth. Their retirement savings had been tied up in Ethan's can't-miss ventures. "They haven't called you yet?" Emma asked. Beth shook her head. "Nope, but maybe that's because they assume a simple farm girl like me doesn't have anything to offer." But the call came soon enough. A text, actually, from Lauren of all people. "Emergency family meeting. Please come. We need you." Beth stared at the message for a long moment, then silently showed it to Luke. His only response was a quiet, resigned sigh. He didn't have to ask what it was about, they both already knew. They arrived at her parents' house the next afternoon. The place seemed smaller now, somehow less intimidating, but the tension in the air was anything but small. Diane opened the door, face drawn and nervous, ushering them into the living room where everyone was already seated, Lauren and Ethan looking hollow-eyed. Her father stiff-backed with a folder in his lap. "We'll get straight to the point," Richard said, clearing his throat. "We need your help." Beth didn't speak. She waited. "We've hit a rough patch," Ethan began, his voice strained. "Some investments didn't pan out." "That's an understatement," Lauren muttered, crossing her arms. "We're at risk of losing everything." Diane chimed in. "The house, the accounts, even Tiffany's college fund." Beth glanced at Luke, who sat calm as always, one arm draped across the back of the couch. His silence made her feel stronger. Her father placed the folder on the coffee table and pushed it toward them. "We've already had the farm appraised. There's a buyer ready. All you have to do is sign." Beth blinked. "You had our land appraised?" "It's not just land," Ethan said quickly. "It's equity. It could save all of us." "Save you," Beth corrected. "You mean it could save you?" Diane leaned forward, her voice desperate. "It's about family, Beth. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for each other." Beth's stomach turned. "You want me and Luke to give up everything we've built, to fix your mistakes?" "It's not about blame," Lauren said, though her tone betrayed defensiveness. "It's about survival. You mocked this farm for years," Beth said quietly. "You called it playing in the dirt. Suddenly now it's worth saving your lifestyle? It's just dirt and weeds." Ethan snapped. "You can build another one anywhere." The room went silent. Even he realized he'd gone too far. Luke stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. "I think we should go." "Wait," Richard said, voice harder now. "You'll come to your senses. You owe us." Beth froze. "Owe you? You wouldn't have even had the land if it weren't for us." Diane added. "We helped you get started. This is just giving back." Beth stood, her voice low and sharp. "For 30 years, I've been treated like the family disappointment. So tell me, what exactly do I owe you?" No one had an answer. They left without signing anything. That night, Luke opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I wasn't going to show you this until we were further along. But I think it's time." Inside were patent documents, financial statements, and research grants. "This," he said, pointing to a page, "is the irrigation system I designed for the North Field. It's been patented." Beth stared at the papers. "Wait, you've been running a company?" "A quiet one," he said. "Stone Agricultural Technologies. We've kept it private so we could build without interference." "Why keep it from my family?" she asked. Luke met her eyes. "Because I wanted to see who they really were." Beth sat in stunned silence as he revealed everything: the government grants, the research partnerships, the profits, and then the twist. Ethan had secretly shorted their stock, betting it would fail. "He used your parents' retirement fund to do it," Luke said. Beth's chest tightened. "So he gambled their future against ours." Luke nodded, and lost. The next day, Lauren, Ethan, and her parents showed up at the farm. Their luxury SUVs kicked up dust as they parked on the gravel driveway. They came with folders and legal papers, ready to push for the sale. But Luke was ready too. He laid out all the patents, the grants, the proof of their company's worth. Then came the bombshell: federal protections on the land, tied to ongoing agricultural research. "You can't sell what you don't own," their lawyer added, "and you certainly can't force them to liquidate protected research land." Diane was pale. Richard looked stunned. Lauren's voice cracked. We didn't know. We didn't know any of this. And that's the point, Beth said. You never bothered to ask. You assumed we were nothing, just farmers. So you gambled everything based on your assumptions. Ethan slumped in his chair. You're really going to let us lose everything? Beth looked around the room, at the people who had belittled her, laughed at her, dismissed her. Then she looked at Luke. Yes, she said, because we already did. The room was silent as Luke laid the thick folder onto the center of the coffee table. Gone was the quiet, unassuming farmer everyone thought they knew. Standing in his place was a man calm, sharp, and unshakably confident. Beth's family, Lauren, Ethan, and her parents, sat wide-eyed, unable to guess what was coming. Before we make any decisions, Luke began, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what this land actually is, and who I actually am. He opened the folder and pulled out page after page, patents, engineering diagrams, research reports, and government grant letters from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This, he pointed to one of the stamped documents, is the patent for the smart irrigation system I built from recycled components and tested in our north field. It cuts water use and increases crop yield by 30%. The government is funding us to expand the research. Richard, Beth's father, went pale. Diane sat stiffly, turning the pages like they were written in another language. Lauren looked genuinely stunned. Ethan, however, frowned. So, you actually have a degree in engineering? Luke looked directly at him, calm but razor sharp. I have a PhD in agricultural engineering from MIT. I didn't come back to farming because I lacked options. I came back because I wanted to test my technology where it matters most. And I'm the CEO of Stone Agricultural Technologies, the same company you secretly shorted, betting it would fail. Ethan flinched, his mouth half open, but Luke didn't give him a chance to reply. You gambled your in-laws' retirement fund hoping my company would crash. But we didn't crash. Our stock doubled, and guess what? The profits from your short? They went straight to us. You could cut the tension in the room with a knife. Lauren stared at her husband, voice shaking. You used my parents' retirement to bet against my sister's husband? Ethan looked away. Beth stood up, her voice steady and low. All my life, I've been treated as the family disappointment because I chose a different path. Because I fell in love with a man who works with his hands. Because I built something from the ground up. And for that, I was mocked. But while you were laughing, we built something real, something powerful. A government-funded agricultural tech company with global impact. We thought you were just growing vegetables. Diane whispered. Because you never asked, Beth said. You never cared to know. And you bet against us. Luke added flatly. Richard shot up from the couch. I could sue you. I could sue for the lost investments. That's when Leonard, their lawyer, walked in through the doorway. Please do, he said with a cold smile. I'd love to explain to a jury how your son-in-law bet against your daughter's company, lost everything, and then tried to strong-arm them into selling their land to bail him out. Silence fell again. We didn't know, Lauren said softly, eyes glassy. We didn't know anything. And that's exactly why you failed. Luke replied, not because you lacked business knowledge, but because you never respected us enough to believe we were capable of more. Diane's tears fell freely now. Ethan slumped in his chair. You could have asked, Beth said, quieter now. You could have believed in us, stood with us, even just once, but you didn't. You mocked us, and when everything crumbled, you came not with humility, but with entitlement. Richard didn't speak. Lauren looked down. Finally, Luke gathered the papers and closed the folder. This meeting is over. From now on, let us live our lives. And take responsibility for your own. The silence in the living room was oppressive, heavy with everything unsaid. Beth sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, her eyes locked on the documents spread across the coffee table, the sale contracts, the desperate proposal, the expectation that she and Luke would simply surrender everything to fix the mess her family had created. Her father cleared his throat. We need you to sign. Beth, this isn't just about us, it's about family. Luke didn't flinch. He remained calm, arms folded, gaze steady. It's not about family, he said evenly. It's about consequences. Lauren, elegant as ever, though her carefully curled hair seemed a bit more frazzled than usual, stepped forward, voice trembling. Please, Beth, we wouldn't ask if we had another choice. Beth looked at her sister. The same sister who had once stood at her wedding reception and mocked her in front of 200 people. The same sister who had rolled her eyes at dirt under fingernails and laughed at the idea of playing farmer. You had choices, Beth said coldly. You just didn't choose us. Her mother's voice cracked. We're not asking for everything. Just the land. You can start over somewhere else. Start over? Beth repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. We've spent years building this place. We poured our blood and sweat into it. You think it's just a plot of dirt you can cash in? Luke stood slowly, his movements controlled. Let's make something very clear. He walked to the mantel and opened a folder, the same one from the night before. This property, he said, pulling out a letter stamped with an official government seal, is part of an ongoing research partnership with the United States Department of Agriculture. It's protected under federal agricultural innovation statutes. This land is not just our home, it's a federally backed research site. The room went still. What does that mean? Richard asked, his voice cautious. It means, said a calm voice from the doorway. You can't sell it, not now, not ever. At least not without navigating layers of legal red tape you'd need a decade to unravel. All eyes turned toward the woman who had just walked in, mid-30s. Dark jeans, crisp white blouse, and a government ID badge clipped to her belt. Sarah Martinez, she said, extending her hand toward Beth and Luke. I'm with the USDA. I came to discuss next steps on your drought-resistant crop trials. Lauren blinked, confused. You're a government official? Yes, Sarah replied, smiling faintly. I oversee federal grant programs tied to experimental agricultural systems. The Stones work is not only approved, it's groundbreaking. We've fast-tracked them for expanded trials and further funding. Ethan stepped forward, tension rolling off him. You don't understand. This land is our only shot. If they don't help, we lose everything. Sarah looked him over. I understand desperation, Mr. Ellis, but I also understand contracts. And this land isn't up for negotiation. You bet against a company that turned out to be more valuable than you realized. That's not Beth and Luke's fault. You're siding with them? Diane asked. Sarah's smile faded. I'm siding with the law. Luke crossed his arms. You see, while you were laughing at us, we were building something real. This land isn't just productive, it's protected. You can't sell what you don't own. And you can't guilt us into handing it over. Either. You're really going to walk away? Lauren asked, her voice cracking. You're going to let your family fall apart? Beth's expression hardened. You let it fall apart a long time ago. Her father's temper flared. After all we've done for you? You think this is fair? Beth's laugh was sharp, humorless. Fair? You belittled me, undermined me, ignored everything I've built. You called me a disappointment for not chasing your version of success. Now, you're broke, and I'm supposed to be your savior? No. Ethan gritted his teeth. You don't understand the damage. We lost everything. Luke nodded slowly. Yes, you lost everything, because you bet against us. Literally, you shorted our company's stock and lost. You used Beth's parents' retirement fund to do it. And now you're here, hoping we'll sacrifice our life's work to cover your loss. Sarah stepped forward again. And let me be clear. Any attempt to force a sale through legal channels would not only fail, but expose all of this publicly. Lauren looked at Beth, eyes pleading now, makeup streaked with tears. We didn't know how much this meant to you. We didn't know how far you'd come. No, Beth said, her voice soft but unshakable. You didn't know because you never asked. And you never respected me enough to find out. They all sat in silence, Diane in tears. Richard looking like the air had been knocked from his lungs. Ethan staring at the floor. And Lauren broken and quiet for once. Beth turned to Luke. Let's go. They walked out the front door into the warm sunlight. The farm stretched out around them, familiar, strong, and entirely theirs. Sarah followed, discussing grant timelines and USDA visits. But Beth only half listened. Because for the first time in years, she felt free. No more proving herself. No more begging for respect. No more trying to fit into a family that never truly saw her. As she looked out over the rows of crops, the wind teasing the tall green stalks, Luke reached for her hand. We made the right call, he said. Beth nodded. We finally turned the tables. And they never looked back. Weeks passed after the tense family meeting, and life at the farm slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm. The fields still stretched endlessly. The morning sun still poured through the kitchen windows, and the quiet evenings on the front porch remained Beth and Luke's favorite time of day. But something had changed. In Beth's heart, Relief had replaced years of feeling like she wasn't enough. She no longer carried the burden of her parents' disapproval, no longer chased validation from her successful sister, and no longer forced a smile through years of being belittled. For the first time in her life, Beth felt free from the mold her family had tried to squeeze her into. One crisp fall morning, while pulling weeds in the garden, Beth noticed a familiar black car stopping at the gate. It was Erin, her youngest sister, the only one who had stayed in touch after everything. Erin stepped out, carrying a small box of pastries. "Hey, Beth," she said softly, her voice hesitant but sincere. "I know I wasn't there that day, but I've heard everything. And I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Beth blinked, then smiled. "Come inside, let's talk." They sat in the kitchen, which smelled of freshly baked apple pie and coffee. Erin glanced around the cozy house, warm and full of character. "You know," she began, "I used to think farming was taking the easy road, like it meant giving up on bigger dreams. But now, I see you were the brave one." Beth gave a quiet laugh. "Brave for not running away?" "No." Erin shook her head. "Brave for being true to yourself. For building a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval." Beth was touched. She had once believed herself weak, for crying at insults, for shrinking under her father's condescension, for being called a disappointment for choosing a simple life. But now, in hindsight, she realized that surviving all of that, and still building something meaningful, took more strength than they would ever understand. Just then, Luke came in from the barn. Jeans dusty, hands calloused, holding a mug of hot tea. He kissed Beth's forehead and smiled at Erin. "Hey, stranger." "Hi, Luke." She smiled back warmly. After Erin left, Beth sat out on the porch, watching the sun sink below the golden fields. She thought about Lauren, who had to sell the Hamptons house and cut her expenses. Ethan had been fired from his finance firm after the scandal broke. Her parents hadn't reached out since that day, but that no longer hurt. She had spent years trying to prove she was enough, as a daughter, a sister, a teacher, a wife. Now, she finally understood. Self-worth doesn't come from someone else's praise. It comes from within, from the choices you make, the hardships you overcome, and the life you build with your own hands. She thought back to those early years with Luke, digging soil, struggling through the first failed harvest, staying up all night trying to keep the farm afloat, winter mornings too cold to breathe. Yet they trudged out to fix the irrigation system, evenings spent planning and improving their growing methods. And the moment Luke showed her his first patent, words printed in black and white, validating that what they built truly mattered, she was proud of herself, proud of the man she married, proud of the life they were living. Beth walked back into the house and wrapped her arms around Luke from behind as he stirred dinner on the stove. "What's this for?" he asked, smiling as he turned toward her. "I just wanted to say, I'm not ashamed anymore," she said, her voice steady, "and I don't need anyone else to tell me that." Luke smiled and pulled her close. "I've always known how amazing you are. Now, finally, you do too." Outside the window, the sky darkened, but inside their kitchen, the light remained warm and steady, just like the life they had built together.